Peter, first of all, I wonder if you can just tell me how you became involved in Children of the Stones.
Well, I'd had a very successful run at the BBC, having done the Troubleshooters and then the Oneida Line as a producer, and of course occasionally directing and even writing in the case of the Oneida Line. And then it suddenly seemed, as I started a program called Quilla, that there was a certain amount of pressure from management on don't be controversial, and the whole point of the particularly the Troubleshooters, as I made it, was to try and be controversial because people would talk about the programme. And I found this very wearing, and so I was in this state of wondering where I was going at the BBC. I went to Cannes for the MIP Television Festival, which is a great big drink-up for television executives and their fur-coated wives and so on, or television salesmen mainly. And I met an old friend called Patrick Dromgoole, whom I've known for some years, and he just thrust a script into my hand and said, oh, have a look at this, will you? And I read this, and I said, and this is for children? He said, yes. And I read it, and he only gave me the first episode. So I said, please, may I have the second episode? So he handed me the script of the first 6 episodes, and I read them, and I said, well, what happens in the 7th? So he said, first I must tell you, we're looking for a producer to produce this. Are you interested? And I said, yes. So he handed me the 7th. And I went down to Bristol, and I thought, oh dear, Bristol, HTV, I don't think they've ever done anything quite as ambitious as this before. What are they going to be like? I'd only been to Bristol once, and we had to do an episode of the Troubleshooters down there, and it was a grisly experience. The studio was too small, and the guys were not very cooperative, and it was hard work. But HTV Bristol, of course, was ITV, and the people there were extremely cooperative. I would change my mind suddenly on a shot, not very often, but sometimes, and they would have built a rostrum to have an arc lamp built. I'd say, oh, sorry, and the cameraman would say, sorry, we've got to move the arc 4 yards over there. Down would come the rostrum without anyone grumbling, and up would go the arc light, and there was no sort of thing about, oh, I don't know, make up your bloody mind sort of thing, and none of that. And they were really first class, and they were really supportive in every way.
You obviously liked the script, you wanted to do the series, but what were the things that attracted you about the project?
Well, I had in fact early on worked in children's television just after the coronation at the BBC when I was still a trainee. I did a very big show the night before the coronation, and then they obviously ran out of money. They'd spent it all on the coronation, which made everyone aware of television. Before that, nobody took any notice. And I then did 3 months in children's television, doing practically a show a day. I did Hugh Weldon's All Your Own, which was an amateur talent show, and a lot of very short plays and things like that, sketches, and it was a wonderful experience because I had everything go wrong. Cameras in shot, microphones in shot, men that shouldn't be there in shot, everything. And so that was all I'd done in children's television. But it wasn't the children's aspect, it was the fact that I knew nothing about Neolithic history. I knew nothing about Neolithic life, except that vaguely these were people who didn't have a language, and they communicated by smiling or groaning or making faces and going, oog, woog. And I thought, well, we must do this with the music. So I managed to get to hear a piece of music by Penderecki, the Polish composer, where it's all done with the bouche fermée, sort of thing. And I met Sidney Saker, the composer, and I said, how would you fancy getting a choir to just sing in sort of groans? And he said, that would be nice, but suppose we put a soprano over the top, and she sings an actual theme. And of course that is what he did, and he produced this beautiful music for the titles. And that also gave us the essence of the strangeness of the story, which is what attracted me in the first place. It was strange, and in a way I'd never done anything like this before. I'd done ghost stories, I'd done tales of mystery of Algernon Blackwood, but I'd never done anything that was about this peculiar, historical event and of people who must have, well, they must have procreated and fallen in love and everything, but they didn't speak like we speak. Perhaps we speak too much, who knows? And that was the thing that I really wanted to examine, plus the general popular aspects of the characters. I mean, the father-son relationship, well, I have two sons and two daughters, but I think this father-son relationship is very interesting and very good, because it's a great bond. And with Gareth Thomas, who's a good actor, I got this bond with this not very good young boy, because he was very inexperienced, but he looked right, and he reacted, and his eyes widened, and he was very good on reactions. So the two of them created this form. Then, of course, there was Veronica Strong, who was the local librarian, school teacher lady, and she was very, she was very forthright and upfront, and she was married, of course, is married to Jeremy Burnham, who wrote the script with Trevor Ray. So they were the good thing, and then the great thing was, of course, getting Ian Cuthbertson and Freddie Jones. Ian was a bonus because he had done an Aeneid in line for me, and I'd known him as an actor in Scotland. But he gave such a presence to Hendrik, the man who was really running the show. He was really running the village through their minds. They were all in bondage to him. And of course he loved this idea, and of course he did it extremely well. But Freddie, I didn't know, and he just took it on as the way he is, a professional actor who he thought he could have a romp with this. And romp is exactly what he did. And he enjoyed doing it, being this funny old tramp. And so there we are. I mean, I enjoyed working with them. That was the point, because the crew in the studio, you see, was so supportive, and they were not saying, "Kong it round there, Governor," they'd do it, and because it was a challenge. I had directed children before in two of the plays I did in my early days at the BBC in 1953. But we're now talking about 1976, and I'd then got a great whole lot of work behind me. I had The Avengers, The Prisoner, all that sort of thing, and working with top names like, the real names from the theatre, like Judi Dench and people like that. So I had a lot more experience with actors. And I loved actors. I loved rehearsing. I still love rehearsing. It's the great thing. I think it's the best thing that can happen to anybody, to go to a rehearsal room and get a boil-up of ideas and that you've never thought of from your actors, and then somehow put it all into a pudding that works. Now, the children sort of didn't really know what was expected of them. They just learnt the lines and said the lines. And so one had, to a certain extent, to say, well, think of staring at a star, and particularly with Peter, and he would, and he did some very nice staring acting. Catherine was a pro. She really had been trained well by one of these theatre schools, and she really was a first-class little actress. And when she had to, halfway through the show, become possessed, she did become possessed, and that was it. And she would walk around looking like this, and you would say, well, please stop. And then there was a boy called Ian Donnelly, who played another boy who was possessed already, and he and Catherine I put into Follow Me, which is the show I did afterwards. The butler, who was played by John Woodnutt, who had been at school with me, in all the amateur dramatics we did at school, he used to get the best parts, and I used to get the female roles, to my great annoyance. And he played the butler, and a rather strange, sort of spooky butler. But then he appeared as a sort of estate agent, showing the man round at the very end. So you really thought, well, is this man really coming now to set the whole thing in motion again when Adam and his son have gone? And that was it. So I don't know. I don't know how you end it, because you have a village which is completely possessed, and you suddenly wipe the slate clean, and they've all got their minds back. I mean, how do you do that? The script was perfectly written from my point of view, and the only thing we did do halfway through, where I felt the actors were getting a little bit tired, was I called a Saturday morning rehearsal where we read through the rest of the script, the last 4 episodes, because I thought they were getting a little mannered, and I thought they ought to know what happened at the end, which I didn't know when I read the first 6 scripts. And that did help. Unfortunately, the way that television was costed in those days, it meant that you had to shoot great lumps of it in the studio. It wasn't the ideal way, and of course now they do film everything in real locations. I'm a great believer of real locations. I love working in the real place. Even when we did, for instance, we did Arch of Triumph with Anthony Hopkins and Leslie Ann Down, and there, instead of having a studio, we built all the sets in an old aircraft hangar near Bath, and that was better than being in a studio with the curiously closed-in feel you get about studio work, really. So the answer is that that was just force majeure. You had to use studios to get the footage, the minutage.
Can you talk a little bit about actually filming on location at Avebury, and what that, I mean, obviously the script sets the series there, but can you talk a little bit about what it was like to be there and to be in this sort of slightly mysterious area?
Yes, well, we were there during an almost perfect summer, as you probably know, and 1976, and I was able to go with the cameraman and say, yes, this is the front of the cottage, the sun's not on it now, it'll be on by 11 o'clock. Right, we'll work it out, we'll get here by 11 o'clock, it'll be perfectly lit, the sun will be just right. But the trouble was, of course, it's a great tourist area, and we had put up a number of fiberglass stones of our own, and a Dutch lady who didn't understand English, so the assistant was saying, please get away from that, please get away from that, and she was saying, vervloekte, I don't know what you're saying to me, I don't understand. And she leant against this stone, and it collapsed, and she had to be carried off in a stretcher. She'd had a sort of fainting fit, because this stone had given way under her. Ken Jones, of course, was enamoured with the whole idea of making extra stones. He was the art director, and very good indeed.
Did you find that the village and the stones themselves had any kind of effect upon your mood? Did you actually feel that it was a kind of, not haunted, but a slightly mysterious place to be in?
No, I'm afraid not. No, we had to conjure that, I'm afraid. It's the sort of village that attracts commuters. People can get to the various towns of Wiltshire and so on quite easily. So some of the cottage living people are not your average cottagers. They have their Jags and Mercs outside. And they did. And of course they were the ones who said, look, I live here and I'm going to drive up this drive, and there you are, so stop your filming. There was a bit of that, but generally speaking, they loved the whole idea, and it was attracting attention, and there you are. The people in the post office were terribly nice. They let us film in the post office. At the end of the shooting, we had a cricket game against the Avebury Village cricket team, and I scored a duck on the first, and there was loud applause on the first ball, and that set the thing off to a good start, and they licked us hollow. Anyway, well, I had never done anything like this before, and I thought, well, it's either going to look like absolute codswallop, or people will believe it. And of course, luckily, we got away with it. People did. If you just go into a thing feeling honesty, let's try and make this work, it works. I've always found that.